Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Optics in Action. Today, I am honored to have a special guest with us. It's Lior Arussy. I hope I've pronounced that correctly. You'll
Yes,
correct
you
me
did
if I
well.
didn't. And he is a global transformation expert with several books that he's written and authored, and a lot of successes in career. So I'm super excited to have you, Lior. Welcome to Optics in Action.
Well, thank you very much for having me on the show.
So the first question I always love to ask my guests is, why are you passionate? Before we even get into what it is you do and what a global transformation expert is and things like that, why are you so passionate about this?
When I started my career, I thought that money and power will make me satisfied. But throughout the journey, I found out that ultimately what really gives me the kick is activating people to reach a new level of performance they didn't know they can do. And I literally got that as feedback from clients. So I would say the ability to see individual or an organization reaching a new level, and they were looking back, it's like, oh my gosh, I couldn't do it myself. I never even dreamt that I can get there. That's the ultimate. That's why I wake up in the morning.
That's fantastic. At the end of the day, it is all about people. And, I often on this podcast, we talk about the intersection of people and process. And it's not lost on my listeners or on people that know me that I am very process oriented. My degree is chemistry and finance and like technical stuff. But I learned very early in my career that without people, you can document a process, you can streamline a process, you can make these amazing, transformations, but without people, it all gets wasted. So tell me more about that, Lior.
So
What does that
but
look
it,
like in terms of engaging people?
so it's very interesting because when I would sit down with the CEO and they'll tell me, this is what I want to achieve, this is my goal, this is my strategy, and so on and so on and so forth. And I said, that's wonderful. I'm now gonna tell you the harsh truth. I'm going to focus on Susie from accounting. And he's like, who's Susie from accounting? And I'm like, Susie from accounting is in charge of the strategy execution. And he would like, no, she's not. I have a VP of strategy. I said, again, you're thinking top down. And that's why, according to a study that we have done with Harvard Business Review in 2017, we benchmarked 422 companies. Only 9% claim that their change or transformation projects have been successful. And if you substitute the word change or transformation with strategy and future, you understand what's at risk here. And what all the companies do all the time is go on a top down. We decided, you do it. And our approach was exactly the opposite. Let's mobilize the people from the bottom up. Let's get Susie from accounting and the thousands of people who can kill this idea, this process, 1,000 small deaths. Let us make them owners of the process like they have designed it, so they will go and execute it even more. And I'll tell you one more
100%.
thing about that, Ryan. Organizations ultimately need to make a very, very tough choice when it comes to process and people. And the question is, what comes first? Are you ultimately a set of processes and your people are just execution? Or are you a set of people that are using the processes in order to create an amazing outcome for customers? Because processes are here in order to create amazing outcomes for customers. They're not here for the sake of control. And that is a tough one because a lot of companies are trying to be both, and they don't understand that when they don't decide, they actually lean towards we're process first, people next. And people are like, I don't want to be just a follower.
That's a fantastic insight. I often go back to Dr. W. Edwards Deming, right, had the quote that a bad system will beat a good person every time.
Yeah.
And that concept it rings so true that if you put bad systems in place, you can recruit the best people. You can identify and bring on the best clients. You can find the best vendors who are going to help you get where you want to go. But if you have bad systems, you're going to chew them up and spit them out. And it really becomes all about the people, and processes and systems should be people focused. They should be people centered. If you can't enable your strategic plan to be executed by the people who need to execute it, then it's a big, giant waste of money. It's a dump truck of money that you're just dumping into a landfill. And I think the way you just articulated is really incredibly powerful.
So, by the way, let's extend this to also when you put together technologies, because it's the same exact thing. You can invest hundreds of millions of dollars in a new ERP system, and if the people are not activated, forget about it. It's not going to happen. But let's
Correct.
take it to the positive, because I don't want it to be just on the negative. I want to give you a great example on the positive. Okay. So I've done a lot of work with automotive companies. Okay. And we've covered over 5,000 dealerships, which is about a third of what number of dealerships in the US. Here's a real story, okay? Customer brings car for service, and he says to the service advisor, look, my wife is expecting any day, so I really need this car taken care of as soon as possible. It's our first baby, and I still need to install a car seat, blah, 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 blah. And the due date is like 5 days from here. The next morning she comes, she hears a message on her voicemail. My wife gave birth. I need my car as soon as possible. She get the car fixed. She actually get a car seat installed. She get him some gifts and everything else. Like, you see the whole bunch of things, and then she sent it on its way and it's ready and everything else. And I sat down with the CEO and I said, where's the process, the details that when a customer is having a baby soon, but yet the time will change, you need to do this, plus you need to install the car seat, plus you need to give them a nice gift, plus you need to write them a nice personal note. There isn't any, because there comes a point that as much as you're going to try to detail all the processes in the world, there comes a point that the processes ends and the story starts. And if your people first, processes as tools, then the stories can shine and people will take initiative. But if you are going to turn all your employees into victims of processes, then they will never become the heroes, which is exactly the topic of my new book, Dare to Author, is about how do you create an environment that people dare to create stories that inspires the organization, the customers, and ultimately deliver exceptional results.
I love that perspective, by the way, and I love the title of the book and thinking about this dare to author, giving people control of that narrative. So tell us a little bit more about the book. Tell us about I
So
understand you've authored a few books, but tell us a little bit more about this one and what benefit people will really get from reading the book and understanding more about it.
Sure. So, since I've explained, I've been in the transformation business for over 3 decades, involved in over 400 transformations, and I always try to create tools to help my clients accelerate that. Because my argument is, in my previous book, and next is now, that the competitive advantage of companies and organizations in the future is going to be the speed and scope in which you adapt to change. Then the question is, why aren't they adopting it? And it can be a new process, it can be a new technology, it can be a new strategy. Why aren't they adopting it? The common cutter-oriented thinking is they're afraid of the future, they're afraid of the unknown, so they default to the old comfort zone. My finding is very, very different. And in fact, here's the thought. When people hear the word change, they equate it with a negative judgment on their past performance. So if you're instituting a new software, and I've been the Excel person, and I have my own Excel, which I have actually fine-tuned for the last 2 decades, and now you tell me I need to change, what I'm thinking is that you are saying that this Excel is a mistake. And the Excel was the center of my performance for 2 decades. So you're now asking me to write off 2 decades of my life? Ain't gonna happen. So the moment and the way change and transformation is being introduced to organizations, it is looking at a departure from the past and judging the past negatively, and that is too much. I can't go and write off 20 years of my resume. It's just too much. I can't call them. So
Correct.
I'm fighting to protect that before I even know what the future is. And here's what I found out. They're stuck in old stories, and they don't know how to convert them into future resilience and future tools. And that is exactly the essence of the book. How do you take past experiences, not just journal it, not just talk about your emotion? I'm not looking for you to do that. I'm looking for you to understand that the power and the strength for you to face the future is actually residing in your past experiences. And I'm introducing a process with prompt questions. The book is also with prompt questions for everybody to apply themselves. How can you close the chapter and develop the next chapter, because we live in stories, we don't live in facts, Ryan. That's the
Yeah,
reality. CEOs love to set up with all their numbers and everything else, and you know what, it doesn't work. People don't live in numbers, they live in stories, and if they're stuck
that's
in an
right.
old story, that's where their actions are going to follow. If I can help them develop the next story, then they will be excited about it and they're going to accelerate the success of it. So it's all about how to help people recognize that if you don't develop the story, you become the victim of the story and not the
Right.
hero of the story. And second thing is, so how do you take even unplanned, unprecedented events and really convert them into future strength and future tools so you can be ready for the future?
Wow. I love that perspective. As you were speaking, I was sort of thinking about it. One of the things that I often talk about is what I call the intersection of people and process. So if you think about two road signs, you have people and process, and it's really where these two things intersect, where the rubber meets the road. It's the people without process get frustrated, and process without people is wasted. And as you were articulating that, I was envisioning that in my mind about how if you're so structured on process, you're like, just get on process street, just follow the process street sign and just follow process. Guess what? People don't change, people don't improve. They get stuck on process street.
Yeah.
And if you just stick on people street and you're like, hey, we're just going to hire the best people, we're just going to have people, 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 but you don't give them at least a framework, at least a cultural framework in which to operate, at least a vision and values, at least, right? If you don't give them any sort of framework to enable them, then they get stuck on People Street and they don't know what to do and they don't know where they're going and they just so I think that as you're articulating that, a really fascinating way of talking about this intersection of people and process, that you've got to get people engaged in that story and navigating. How do they navigate through all of the complexities of that?
Let me give you an example. I think this can be very practical for a lot of your listeners. So when I step into a lot of companies, there are a lot of cliches. Okay, let's take two cliches. The customer is always right. Okay, and the second is do whatever needs to be done to treat the customer. Now, here's why those cliches do not work. They are in the people street, as you call it, not on the process street. It's like, hey, carte blanche, do whatever it takes. The answer is no. You're not allowing them to spend endlessly. Okay, there should be some guidance. And second, the customer is not always right. Sometimes the customer is lying. Sometimes the customer is asking for things that are dangerous. So by giving you
Sometimes the customer doesn't even know what to ask for or how
correct,
to
correct.
articulate.
But I'm saying sometimes they're asking for dangerous things. You know, the opioid thing. The customer was always right. Give me a break. The customer was
Yeah,
absolutely wrong. Okay.
correct.
The customer was miserable. So when you give employees something like this, CEOs think that they are empowering them. They're actually paralyzing them because I know they're not right. So you are asking me to do something that is wrong, and I need some guidance about what can I do. And second, when you say do whatever, that's too much. So I'll give you an example of how it was brought back. So at the Ritz-Carlton hotels, every employee is empowered to spend out to $2,500 in order to please the customer. That gives me a framework. I know what I can do and I know what I cannot do. Okay. By the way, that number is not arbitrary because the Ritz-Carltons have actually calculated what is the lifetime value of a customer, which is over $600,000, and therefore $2,500 is a legitimate investment in
Mhm.
keeping them coming back. So again, give me the tools, but allow me to think because the tools are not going to fit every situation, but it's going to give me a framework that allows me to apply my thinking. And here's the critical thing. What is the problem with empowerment? When you try to be people only on the people street, right? And you think you're empowering them, and in fact, you're paralyzing them, is because they cannot defend their decision. But if you give them framework, they can defend their decision. This is a loyal customer, you can spend up to this. This is a customer who's only do this much, then you can spend. Then I can make a decision. The essence of empowerment is making decisions, and you need
Yeah.
to give them the tools to do that.
So tell me a little bit more about the title of the book, Dare to Author. You sort of alluded to it earlier, but I want to explore that a little bit further.
Sure,
Tell me more about the meaning of the title of the book, Dare to Author.
sure. the essence of the book is challenging each and every one of us as professionals or as individuals. Who's the hero of your story? Who's authoring your life story? And in fact, the first section describes that if you are not a proactive author of your life story, you actually becomes a victim of prejudice and biases. Let's take the imposter syndrome. Let's take the good news, bad news syndrome, and so on and so forth. I'm giving examples of how we become victims of our life story. And even if we'll be successful, we'll never be happy because those prejudices are changing it. Let's take an example, Ryan. Let's do a quick exercise. I want you to answer from your gut. Bad news, good news. What do you want to hear first? Gut.
Well, I would love to hear good news.
Okay.
But, I think sometimes if I know that I'm getting bad news and good news, then I'd rather have the bad news first. If
Excellent.
I
So
know I'm
now
getting
you
both,
fit.
I would rather have the bad news first.
Excellent. So now you fit with 75% of the people who are saying bad news first, good news not. And in the book, I'm describing that this is actually a mindset of fixers versus creators. Because when you're bad news first, you want to fix a problem, but you are retaining the original setup. If you're good news first, you're a creator. You're saying, look, whatever that situation is, there must be an opportunity. I can
Mm.
take it to the next level. And again, this is an example that when you are not minded of how to author your life story, you become a victim of bad news first. Let's retain the current situation. Let's be a fixer and let's miss the opportunities of what could have been done out of that whatever crisis. Okay. So this is just one example, and I have a variety of examples of what happened. The confirmation bias, the end of history
Mm.
illusion, the gratitude denial syndrome. These are all examples of when you are not actively authoring your life story professionally or personally, then it will be authored to you. And my challenge to people is it's time for you to become the hero in your story, even in unprecedented events. And I'll give you a business example. So during COVID, I got a lot of clients calling me, freaking out. What are we going to do? This is that. I said, how do you feel about it? And they all ultimately said, it's unprecedented and we don't know what to do. And I said, factually, you're right. Emotionally, it's a problem because when you say unprecedented, you tap into the part of your brain which is helpless and have no tools. And they said, but that's exactly how we feel. And I said, okay, so let's do an exercise. Let's go to the last time you felt an unprecedented event hitting you. And for many of them professionally, it was 2008, 2009, the financial
Hmm.
crisis. And I said, obviously, you have survived it. Maybe even you thrived it. Let's go and write this chapter. And we went through a whole exercise. What was the threat? How did you feel? What was the depth of your depression? How did you rise up? What was the turning point? What was the superpower? What were your new insights? What values did you learn? And ultimately, what tools did you develop? And after we've done this exercise, people are like, oh, I'm going to use those tools now for COVID. And I said, this is the essence of Dare to Author. When you take the time to author past experiences and discover and distill your superpower and your values, and what that gives you the strength and the toolkit to deal with the next. And in the book, there's a chapter about COVID where I'm challenging people to do exactly the same because COVID, we all started as victims,
Yeah.
and we emerge differently. So I'm talking about a process of conversion of past experiences into future ready toolbox. That's really the essence of the book. And I'm giving examples how to do it in leadership, how to do it in order to drive exceptional performance with your team, how to apply it to childhood scars, how to apply it to relationships, the variety of examples.
Yeah. I love that. That as you were talking through that, I was able to start thinking about some of those things in my life that have, I would say made me who I am today. Doesn't, in that connotation, it's like, well, am I a victim of those experiences that have made me who I am today? Or have they created a platform for me to create opportunities and author new things in creating the vision that I've been working on creating? And I think we can look at it either of those two ways, right? We can either look at it through
Absolutely.
the lens of, am I a victim? Or we can look at it through the lens of, am I writing a story that's going to pave the path and grasp the opportunity? I think it's a fascinating way to think.
Absolutely. But my main claim is most people are not aware of the fact that by not choosing to become the hero, they're
Mm.
choosing to be a victim. If I'll call people and say, "Hey, do you think you're a victim of your life?" They'll say no. But then if I ask them, "But do you author the story of your life?" No. Well, you know what? If you don't author the story of your life, you are choosing to be a victim.
You're choosing, yeah. By default, right? I think by
Right?
default,
And that's the
many people
issue.
choose to be a
I want to
victim.
give people tools to stop being victims when they're not even aware that they're choosing to be a victim. But when you ask them, but are you authoring the story of your life? No, I'm not. So guess what? You're a victim. Prejudice, biases, fears, anxieties. Yeah,
Yeah. One of the things that became clear to me in writing my book, so Optics is the name of my book. It's aligning people and process to accelerate performance. The word optics came to me and I started thinking about the two definitions. One definition is the physics, the study of the physics of light. The second definition of the word optics is the perceptions of people. So I fell in love with this concept of the word optics and this intersection of the perceptions that people have. And as you were speaking, I'm thinking about kind of the perception of, am I a victim or am I an author? And depending on how we look through the lens or which lens we look through, maybe the same technical elements of our life that made us who we are, or that have established a foundation of who I am today because of past experiences. That's technical stuff. The lens that I choose to look at that through, oh, that's why I'm a victim, or oh, that's why I'm an author and I want to go and create some new stuff. We get to make that decision which lens we look at.
that's
The technical
that's
stuff is the technical stuff. Like that
that's
happened. It's
perfect.
history, right? But the lens that we look at it through is victimhood or off, being an author, being a creator. And
Yeah.
I think that's a really interesting perspective you just
So
shared.
here, Ryan, another great example of that, because I use the concept of lenses, but in the context of authoring, words are basically your choices, okay?
Mm,
So let's take the same situation, and I'm describing couple possible ways of describing a situation, okay? You can be result oriented, so you're going to go straight to the bottom line of what happened at the end. You can be emotionally engaged, so you're going to describe all the emotions of all the people during that situation. You can be a journey person, so you're going to go chronologically and describe it step, 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 step. You can be inspirational, so you're going to extract already the inspirational moment and focus on that, not necessarily the results or the emotions of
mm,
people. And I listed, I believe, 9 different ways or 10 different ways in which you can take the same event and with a different verbal or textual lens, basically describe the same event.
yeah.
And I'm asking people to at least be minded of what is your style and how do you describe it, and is it productive or is it destructive? I have a whole chapter on cynicism. Okay, it's a pet peeve of mine because I once, by the way, kicked out an executive out of one of my workshops, and he said, "Why are you doing that?" And I said, "Because you're cynical." And he said, "This is how I manage." I said, "No, this is how you destroy." Because what is the
Yeah.
message behind cynicism? You think it's funny? It's not funny because what you're telling everybody is why bother? Why bother? Why try? I said, can you show me an entrepreneur that told you that they've been successful because they've been cynical? I doubt it. I doubt it. So you don't even aware that your cynical demeanor, which became the authoring vehicle of your life, turned you into a complete victim of why bother. And the guy looked at
Correct.
me, he's like, I never thought about it this way. I said, yeah. And a lot of people are addicted to cynicism and they like to make those jokes. And it's a quick fix with long-term consequences.
Wow, this is really powerful words and
Thank you.
articulation of what we've walked us through here, Lior. I like to keep these episodes to,
No
25
problem.
minutes or
Good.
so. So if there was one take, well, first I'll ask you, would you be willing to come back? I'm going to read
I
your
would
book
love to
because
come
I
back.
find this fascinating.
Ryan, I'd
I
love
would
to
love
come
to
back.
have you come back in a few months after I've read the book and we go through some of this. I know that there are people in my lives, business owners, even myself, who will benefit from this. So I'd love to have you back in the future.
No problem at all. Just drop me a note. I'll be happy to come back.
Yeah, I'd love if you could share with the audience one key takeaway. And I'm sure with all of the stuff you shared, you've got lots of takeaways you could give. But if you could share with the audience one key takeaway, one thing that they could be thinking about or that they could do differently to start that transformation, what would that be?
My takeaway will be watch the words you're choosing to describe yourself and your situation and
Mm.
ask yourself, are they productive or are they blaming? It starts when you stop blaming and you start being productive. So don't tell me what's wrong. Don't describe to me how miserable you are. Help me understand how to help you. So watch your words. Are they productive or are they blaming? That's the
I love
first
it.
step.
I love it. Well, thank you very much for being on this episode of Optics in Action.
Thank you
How
very
do
much for having me.
Yeah, how do people get a hold of you? How do they learn more? Where do they find your book to learn
So
more?
the book is available in all the regular channels, so Amazon and then Bookshop and other places, Barnes and Noble. Best way to connect with me is through the traditional channels, LinkedIn and Instagram and so on and so forth. But LiorArussy.com is where you'll see the biggest repository of my articles, my videos, all available free of charge. LiorArussy.com will be a great starting point. And if you need to connect with me, all the contact and information are there.
Fantastic. Thank you again for being on this episode of Optics in Action.
Thank you very much for having me.
Hey there, my name is Ryan Weiss, and I am the host of the Optics in Action podcast, where we spotlight visionary leaders who bring clarity and innovation to their industries. If you are interested in being a guest, or if you know someone who would be, you can find more information about the podcast and listen to previous episodes at opticsinaction.com. We'd be thrilled to have you on the show and can't wait to hear your story.